Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. You know the drill. We're ranking all the Pillars of Eternity classes. If you need a refresher on basic mechanics, there's a link in the description to my 2023 Pillars of Eternity Beginner's Guide. Let's jump into the fourth class of this series, Druid. Druids employ a variety of spells and shapeshift into beasts to cause havoc within enemy ranks. The core mechanic of this class is shapeshift, which allows druids to master one animalistic form. More on this later. They also get access to offensive and support-oriented spells. Every 2 levels, druids automatically gain access to a new set of spells. Initially, these spells are per rest, but over time some of the lower level spells will become per encounter. Druids get a +1 bonus to lore and a +2 bonus to survival. The health regeneration survival bonus could be useful if you plan to play this class as a frontline fighter, and the accuracy bonus is great for all characters. Lore, of course, is always a great choice for your main character. Druids gain very low endurance, low health, very low accuracy, and average deflection. This might make you think druids are terrible at everything, but don't worry, this class has some great strengths. Starting at level 1, you could choose one Spiritshift animal power that can be activated once per encounter. The power lasts 15 seconds, and the duration is increased by 5% for every point of intelligence you have. Druids who Spiritshift lose all access to their weapons and armor, along with any bonuses those items may have provided. Instead, each animal form comes with its own powers and weapons. All of the forms have the base damage reduction of 8 against all damage sources unless it's stated otherwise. This is increased by +2 for every 3 levels beyond the first. All of their weapons are considered to be unarmed and dual wielded with a damage resistance bypass of +5 unless it's stated otherwise. The damage and accuracy of the forms increases as you level up. You are able to use spells while you are spirit shifted. Spiritshift Bear gets access to a special hide that increases his base damage reduction from 8 to 10, making this the most well-protected animal form available to you. It also gets access to Terrifying Roar, which frightens all enemies within a 3-meter radius. Frighten causes enemies to have their resolve and dexterity reduced by 2, while their accuracy is reduced by 10. I think this form is underwhelming as a frontline fighter, but it's very nice for a caster-focused druid who wants a backup option if enemies get into melee range. Spiritshift Boar has tusks that cause wounding, which deals 20% of your damage over time, in this case 5 seconds. They also automatically regenerate endurance over time. You could combine this with other endurance regeneration options to make your character more tanky, but overall I don't find this animal form to be compelling. Skip it. Spiritshift Cat uses claws as weapons that are listed as having an average speed, but in fact take half the time to attack that other average weapons do. This form also gets the Cat Flurry attack, which increases your already superior attack speed by 33% for 10 seconds once per rest. In my opinion, Cat is the strongest option for a druid focused on melee damage. Spiritshift Stag has a passive ability that increases all of his defenses by 7 for 30 seconds. It also gets a version of Barbarian's Carnage ability that can be manually activated to deal 33% of your damage to all enemies in a 1-meter radius from the target. This is terrible, as its radius cannot be increased by your intelligence, and it can only be activated once per rest. Skip this option. Finally, Spiritshift Wolf gets the Knockdown ability, which allows them to knock an enemy prone twice per rest. Prone reduces dexterity by 2, reflex and deflection by 10, and the enemy cannot take any actions. This is very useful whether you are a frontline fighter or prefer to be in the backline and use Wolf as a bailout option. This is another strong choice, especially since it's always appealing to play as a werewolf, so in my opinion, the choices come down to Cat if you want to be a frontline fighter, or Wolf if you are more of a backline caster and just use the spirit forms as a backup option. Level 1 will automatically provide all your level 1 druid spells. Charm Beast will charm all enemy beasts in a 1.25 meter radius. Charm makes enemies use their basic attacks against your other foes. Beast is the largest category of enemies in the game, and there are many fights where all your enemies are beasts. Consequently, this is a fantastic power to have, as it will make those encounters trivial. Dancing Bolts hits all enemies in a 3-meter radius with a considerable amount of shocking damage. This power doesn't damage your allies, so it's a great early game damage option. Nature's Mark causes all enemies in a 2.5 meter radius to take a -10 penalty on their deflection and reflex defenses for 30 seconds. A fast cast time combined with a large area of effect makes this a great debuff option for most of your playthrough. Sunbeam does a large amount of burn damage to all characters in a 1.25 meter radius along with blinding them. Blind reduces accuracy by 25, perception by 4, movement by 2, and the enemy's reflex and deflection defenses are reduced by 20. This is a more powerful option than Dancing Bolts, but it can also hit party members and has a smaller area of effect, so I don't use it as often. Talon's Reach does a massive amount of slash damage to all enemies in a 1.25 meter radius. This is a fast cast, which makes it more appealing. However, it only has a range of 6 meters, unlike Dancing Bolts, which lets you cast from 15 meters away. If you are comfortable bringing your Druid closer to the action, it's a great option, but otherwise, I would stick with Dancing Bolts. Tanglefoot causes all characters in a 5 meter radius to become hobbled. Hobbled creatures have their dexterity reduced by 2, their movement reduced by 1.5, and their resolve defenses reduced by 20. This is a great way to neutralize a group of enemies that have to get close to damage you. It also really helps a team that is focused on dealing sneak attack damage. Nature's Vigor creates a friendly aura of effect that heals all of your party members over time. It also gives your entire party a bonus of 15% to their max endurance for 12 seconds. This is not a huge amount of healing that brings your party back from the brink. It's more like something you cast early to keep things from ever going bad in the first place. That 15% increase to max health becomes more and more powerful as your health pool increases, so this spell is useful the entire game. Vile Thorns does a massive amount of pierce damage to all characters in a 3 meter 90-degree cone. It will also sicken characters, which reduces their attributes by 1 and their fortitude and will defenses are reduced by 10. The massive area of effect makes it harder to use this without hitting party members, so I rarely bother with it. Winter Wind does solid freeze damage to all enemies within 8 meters in a 60-degree cone. It will also push those enemies back 2 meters while having a strong chance to interrupt. As I've mentioned before, I am not a fan of spells that push enemies away because that leaves my melee fighters at a disadvantage. If most of your party members fight at range, then that's not a concern, so you should go crazy with this spell. At level 2, you will unlock 4 mutually exclusive talents that can increase the damage of your strikes while spirit shifted. You can get 30% of your damage added as burn, corrode, shock, or freeze. I could be wrong, but I believe out of all the elements, the least amount of enemies are resistant to corrode damage, so that's the route I would choose. At level 3, you unlock second level spells. Autumn's Decay deals immediate corrode damage and corrode damage over time to all characters within 5 meters in a 90-degree cone. The large area of effect makes this difficult to use without massacring your party, but it's still a very powerful option. Blizzard deals freeze damage and reduces the attack speed for all characters within 2.5 meters. I prefer debuffs that set enemies up for more damage, so this spell doesn't appeal to me, but reducing a group of enemies' attack speed can definitely change a fight. Burst of Summer Flame does fantastic burn damage to all characters in a 1.25 meter radius. The small area of effect makes it easy to place away from party members, but at the same time it won't affect nearly as many enemies as Autumn's Decay. Conjure Lesser Blight allows you to summon a blight of one element to help you. This spell takes forever to cast and there's nothing special about the summon, so I never use it. Firebrand gives you a sword of pure fire that inflicts burn damage. Either you are focusing on spell casting and this is useless, or you are focused on melee damage while spirit shifted. Therefore, this spell serves no purpose for a druid. Hold Beast allows you to paralyze all enemy beasts within a 1.25 meter radius. As we have already discussed, if you are facing a group of beasts, then Charm Beast is the way to go, and this spell is not as useful. Insect Swarm deals piercing damage over time and reduces the concentration of all enemies within a 1.25 meter radius. If you're focusing on interruptions, this will definitely help, but otherwise, the damage takes too long. It is easy to place though, so if enemies are immune to the other damage you usually do, this is a nice switch up. Taste of the Hunt changes a druid's melee weapon so it deals additional raw damage and heals you. This is useful if you are focused on dealing melee damage in Spiritshift form, but otherwise it doesn't serve a purpose. Woodskin creates a friendly area of effect that gives the entire team a +6 bonus to damage resistance against pierce, shock, burn, and slashing damage for a limited amount of time. At this point in the game, the bonus helps quite a bit, so this is nice for really tough fights. At level 4, you get access to a greater version of whatever Wild Strike option you chose at level 2. This feat will add 15% damage of the same element you originally chose, so if you are focusing on melee damage, definitely pick it up. You also have the option to get one additional level 1 spell use. Some of the spells are still really nice at this point in the game, so this isn't a bad option if you are focused on spell casting. At level 5, you get access to level 3 spells. Beetle Shell places one friendly target in a 100 hit point stasis shield, which makes them invulnerable but also unable to attack or move. Frankly, if a party member is about to die, I'd rather they get off one last spell or attack and just die. Freezing them is completely unappealing, so I don't bother with this spell. Also, powerful enemies can break through the shield and kill your party member anyway. Infestation of Maggots damages enemies in a 1.25 meter radius in direct proportion to how much endurance they have already lost. This is a fantastic spell to use against bosses with high HP pools that you have whittled down halfway or more. You won't use it all the time, but when it's useful, it's absolutely devastating. Nature's Balm heals all allies within 1.25 meters over a period of time. This is arguably inferior to Nature's Vigor, so I wouldn't use it. Purge of Toxins makes one ally immune to poisons and disease for a limited amount of time. A great option for your tank when you know those are the types of enemies you are facing. Returning Storm creates an area of effect that repeatedly hits enemies with shock damage and stuns them. Stunned enemies cannot take any action, their dexterity, perception, and intellect are reduced by 4, and their reflection and deflection defenses are reduced by 30. This immediately becomes your most powerful damage and debuff spell all in one. Keep in mind if there's only one enemy in the area of effect, then they will be struck multiple times, making this spell useful in any situation. Spreading Plague hobbles and weakens up to 6 enemies. Weakened enemies have their might and constitution reduced by 2, movement reduced by 1, and fortitude and will defenses are reduced by 20. The vast majority of the time, stunning your enemies will be the superior option, but stacking debuffs on bosses is advantageous, so this spell has its uses. Stag's Horn causes massive piercing damage to one enemy, along with reducing its deflection and reflex defenses by 10. Most of the game you are facing swarms of enemies, so the Storm is more useful and the Plague is probably a better debuff option. Twin Stones does crush damage to one target while doing piercing damage in a large area of effect. This is inferior to Returning Storm, so I'd never use it. At level 6, you unlock the ability to add one more second level spell use. Personally, I don't think any of the level 2 spells are good enough to warrant this option, but it might fit with your playstyle. At level 7, you unlock level 4 spells. Boiling Spray does burn damage to all characters within a 6 meter radius and a 90-degree cone, while also pushing those characters back 2 meters. This spell is difficult to place without destroying your team, and I have mentioned before I don't care for powers that push enemies back since it's disadvantageous for melee-oriented party members. Calling the World's Maul does a large amount of piercing damage in a 2.5 meter radius while also knocking characters prone. Not as good as the Storm, but it's also not a bad option. Conjure Blight is another slow spell for a mediocre summon. I never use this. Hailstorm does crush and freeze damage to all characters in a 5 meter radius. This is inferior to World's Maul and Storm, so I never use it. Moonwell heals a massive amount of endurance for all allies within a 2.5 meter radius, while also increasing all their defenses by 10 for a decent amount of time. This is a druid's most powerful heal, and honestly, most of the spells at this level are mediocre, making it easy for you to just spam this whenever you need it. Overwhelming Wave creates a wave of 10 meters that does crushing damage and stuns enemies. It's very difficult to apply without hitting your teammates, so I don't use this. Wicked Briars does mediocre piercing damage to all characters in a 2.5 meter radius and hobbles them. It does have a fast cast, so sometimes it's useful, but this option is inferior from both a damage and debuff standpoint, so most times I ignore it. Form of the Delumgon gives your entire team a bonus of +8 damage reduction against Pierce, Corrode, Crush, Shock, and Slash damage, while also increasing their move speed by 1, providing immunity to the Stuck Affliction, and giving them a bonus of 25 to defense when disengaging. This is obviously an upgrade over Woodskin, but honestly I don't think the buff is worth taking Spellcast away from Moonwell. Skip it. At level 8, you will have the option to get one more cast of level 3 spells, which let you use Returning Storm one more time, so this is nice to have. At level 9, you get your first spell mastery, which lets you use that spell once per encounter without taking up one of your per rest spell slots. From your options at spell level 1, I would take Charm Beast. Level 9 will also unlock 5th level spells. Cleansing Wind has a length of 10 meters and will heal all allies while pushing back enemies 3 meters. This is mediocre and I never use it. Embrace the Earth Talon does slashing damage and temporarily petrifies all characters in a 1.25 meter radius. Petrified enemies have their dexterity reduced to 0, while their reflex and deflection defenses are reduced by 40. They also take twice as much damage from attacks. This is a fantastic debuff to apply, especially in boss battles. Firebug does solid burn damage on up to 8 targets. Not bad, but there's a much better option at this level. Nature's Terror does shock damage and terrifies all characters within a 1.25 meter radius. Terrified enemies have their resolve and dexterity reduced by 4, while their accuracy is reduced by 20. Not bad, but again, there's a much better option available to you. Plague of Insects does a massive amount of raw damage to all enemies in a 5 meter radius while reducing their concentration by 20 and sickening them. This is a fantastic damage option, especially if your team is focused on interrupting enemies. Relentless Storm does less damage and its stun duration is lower than Returning Storm, but the bolts are triggered more frequently, making it more effective overall. This is your best spell at this level and something you should be using all the time. Wall of Thorns creates a 20 meter wall that does weak piercing damage and weakens anyone who passes through it. This isn't worth it, so I never use the spell. At level 10, you can get one additional use of your level 4 spells, which is definitely worth it if you are focused on might and can effectively heal the team using Moonwell. At level 11, you can master one level 2 spell. If you are focused on melee, then Taste of the Hunt might be helpful, or you could pick up Woodskin for some extra defense. Quick note before we review the last 3 levels. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate you hitting the like button. This information lets me know which videos the community is enjoying. If you want to support this kind of content, please consider becoming a member of the channel where you will get access to full playthrough episodes. Level 11 will also unlock 6 level spells. Conjure Greater Blight is another slow, unimpressive summon. Garden of Life heals all allies in a 5 meter radius based on how many corpses are in the area. The potential healing is massive, but Moonwell is a much more dependable option, so I skipped this. Rot Skull summons a ranged weapon that causes crush damage and applies a disease-based corroded area of effect that does damage over time. This is actually the most damaging spell at this level, so even though it runs counter to how you've been using your Druid, it's still a worthy option. Sunlance does solid pierce and burn damage onto one target. Most of the time you'll be facing swarms of enemies, so this isn't all that great. Venom Blood deals raw damage along with weakening and frightening all enemies in a 2.5 meter radius. If you really need to apply a couple of debuffs, it's an okay option, but most of the time I skip it. At level 13, you can master one level 3 spell, and obviously Returning Storm should be your pick. Level 13 will also unlock 7th level spells. Call to the Primordials summons 2 or 3 random oozes and slimes for 35 seconds. I still consider this to be mediocre, but it's the best Druid summon you are going to get, and springing 3 additional allies onto enemies is a fantastic way to control the battlefield. Nature's Bounty causes all allies within 5 meters to fill their quick item slots with the Nature's Bounty Potion, which provides 12 healing points, a 20% increase to attack speed, and a +5 bonus to might and perception. Personally, I rarely use quick items, so this spell doesn't appeal to me. Also keep in mind that while the buff is definitely nice, it won't stack with any spells your priest or other party members cast, so it might be redundant. Weather the Storm gives your entire party a bonus of +15 to damage reduction against burn, shock, freeze, and corrode damage for a short length of time. This could be useful to guard against a really tough barrage of boss level damage, but for the most part I don't use it. At level 15 you can master one level 4 spell, and obviously my choice is Moonwell. Level 15 also unlocks 8th level spells. Avenging Storm does shock damage and attempts to stun every enemy that you hit or attempts to hit you in melee. Obviously, if you are focusing on spirit shifting, this is going to be very useful. Otherwise, you can ignore it. Fire Stag summons a stag that you can move around like a regular unit. You can also detonate the summon, which does fire or pierce damage to anyone caught in the blast. This could be a great way to open a fight, so you might get some use out of it. Tornado creates an area of effect with a 30-meter length that does crush damage and knocks characters prone. It also bounces up to 3 times, making it particularly deadly in small quarters. It's very difficult to deploy this without ripping apart your team, so I cannot recommend it. Overall, I rank Druid a B+. Spirit shifting is overpowered in the early game, but the damage scales poorly. Patches address this problem to some degree, but still, even with the heavy investment in a melee playstyle, you are not going to be as devastating as a barbarian or a paladin. From a defensive standpoint, losing all of your gear hurts, and the slow damage reduction increase as you level up doesn't really make up for that. Consequently, druids cannot effectively serve as tanks or frankly even as off-tanks for your team. From a spellcasting standpoint, druids are the best area of effect damage dealers in the game, even better than wizards. Unfortunately, in the areas of buffing, debuffing, crowd control, and healing, they range from serviceable to outright inferior compared to other spellcasting classes. So you get great damage and a little bit of variety, but honestly I find the spell selection lacking. From a role-playing standpoint, Druid doesn't clash with being a watcher, but even here I find it lacking again. The Druid party member you receive is Herveus, and while I don't particularly care for him, compared to your other party member options, I do strongly feel that having him on your team is the best way to experience being a Druid. His journey of self-discovery, while also recounting stories of his clan's culture, is way more fascinating than the tale you create on your own playing as his class. While Druid is fantastic, it's not so great that 2 of them on the same team really makes sense. Therefore, I rank it lower, because honestly choosing it for yourself is an inferior story experience compared to what you could have. That completes my ranking of the Druid class. Hope all of you enjoyed this video. Take care!